In today's video, I'm going to be replacing all of these airbags on my 2001 Prevost XL2. When I was driving my Prevost home from purchasing it, everything was going just fine. However, when I got home, I initially noticed that the passenger side was starting to lean after a few days. That part was not inherently concerning. That can happen on an air suspension system. But the thing that I then noticed when I parked it in the shop was that the tag axle driver's side airbag was audibly leaking. And I was able to find the area where it was leaking. And then as I looked around and checked out the condition of all of the other airbags, they pretty much all showed some level of dry rot. And airbags can be kind of sneaky about that. I'll show you in a bit a couple of areas where they can be looking fine on the outside and then they're hiding some dry rot. My philosophy with RV or bus ownership is to try to over-maintain at home so that you don't have any problems on the road. And knowing that we're planning on keeping this for quite a while, I just ordered a pile of 8 airbags from Prevost, and I'm going to be putting them on. Prevost Direct actually tends to be your best source for getting parts for these buses, and they also generally actually save you money versus some third-party suppliers. You might be able to get them cheaper someplace else, but these are genuine Goodyears as opposed to some no-name brand or knockoff. So I'm happy maybe spending a little bit more to get a good quality product that I probably won't have to deal with again in my ownership. The first thing that you're going to have to do is you're going to have to jack the bus up so that you can get the tag axle wheels and the front steer axle wheels off. If you do the tag wheels and the steer wheels, you actually will be able to get at all 8 of the airbags. You don't need to get the drive tires off to get at the airbags, but you might end up choosing to anyway. I have a separate video about jacking the bus up that you can watch if you haven't done that before. So now we're going to go back. I'm going to show you some of the things that you need to know, and I'm also going to show you where a couple of the airbags looked okay, but were actually not okay. So I've got the driver's side rear tag off here, and let me just kind of show you what we're dealing with. All of the airbags are pretty similar. You've got the rear driver's side tag for the drive axle. Drive axle has 4 airbags total, 2 in the front, 2 in the back. But so all of them are set up about the same. You've got a nut on one side of the top. The other side has the air fitting that goes in. This helps to align it. And then underneath, this one's easier to show, but you got 2 nuts as well. For the tag axle airbag, if you look carefully, you'll see that there's a couple of holes here, and that's actually where you get a socket in there to reach up. The nuts are hidden on the bottom, so those are going to be a little bit more fun, I guess you could say, to get off. But as you take a look at these bags from a distance, they really don't look too bad, this one especially. But dry rot on airbags can sometimes be hidden, and so this bag was leaking audibly and actually not able to get the bus up to a very good ride height when I have it connected to my compressor, which it should be doing. And I was able to feel the air coming out from this area of the airbag after some diagnostics. And so if you look carefully down here, and especially under this lip here, you'll start to see some cracks in the airbag. And this is where you're going to end up finding them. You don't usually see them very visibly in the middle. If you've gotten to that point, then the ends are probably really bad. So when you're looking at airbags and trying to figure out if they're good or not, you probably want to take a close look all around on them. Rubber deteriorates with time, so the age of them matters. And so even though some of them are probably okay, this one actually looks pretty good. Although even then, you see some dry rot starting around there. It just makes sense to go ahead and do all of them. You can see the shocks aren't in the best of shape either. A couple of them have been replaced, but you have some that are older. So I'm probably going to replace those at some point as well. So all of these airbags have these push-to-connect fittings on the top. You can see that you also have one of these on this little accumulator air tank that there's a whole lot of these all around the bus. To get any of these push-to-connect fittings off, you push down on the top and then you pull up on the hose itself. And depending on how much gunk there is in there, this can be more or less challenging. So now that I've said that this one should not be too bad, it will undoubtedly be a real pain. Another thing to point out, before you start to try to get this out, you can open this relief valve at the bottom of the accumulator tank. That makes sure that you don't have any air pressure in the system. The way these fittings work, if there is air pressure, they hold even tighter. So that's something that you want to get off. I swear the other side was easier. made some progress. Sometimes what you do is you push down a little bit on this outer ring, which is the release part, and the hose at the same time. Try not to push the hose back in, but sometimes that will get it back down into the release position. And then you can get a little bit more out. There. And now you got it. So now I'm going to take this fitting off, get the nuts off, and then this airbag should come out. I am going to be replacing these fittings on all of the airbags just because these are 20-year-old fittings. The O-rings inside of them are deteriorating. This can be a point of air leakage. In fact, this was what I was thinking might have been leaking in the first place. I had to replace one of those behind the dashboard already. So rather than giving yourself some headaches later down the road and saving a few bucks, just put the new fittings in when you're doing it. So now I'll get this thing off, at least I hope. All right, I got everything ready to pull this airbag out. You can see the old fitting here, and this was not actively leaking, but it is 22 years old, so I'm thinking that it's the right thing to do to replace them all. These two nuts that are kind of hidden in there weren't too bad to get at. You need a 3/4 inch socket for the nuts, and then a 1 1/16 to get at this air fitting that goes into the bag there. And now I'll just need a pry bar to try to get everything out and get the bag removed. Something I will mention is that an air ratchet is really nice to have with some of these. I think I'm going to be using that a whole lot on the bus here. All right, I got that airbag out, first out of 7. So here's that tag axle bag that was leaking, and let's take a look at this. So you can see here that it's pretty dry rotted out at the edge. Looks fine here, and then as I push it in, you can see that right there it gets really bad. And that was actually where it was leaking audibly, was when it was down all the way. If I was able to get it up just a little bit, you can see that that starts to seal up a little bit, and it was actually somewhat holding air. So this one was pretty bad. I'm sure this is going to be the worst out of the ones I find, since the others did not seem to be actively leaking, but just good to get them all done. Well, isn't this always how these things go? You get to the last one and then you kind of figure out how to do it. So the tag axle has to be jacked up. Again, you can just use a floor jack to loosen the slack on the chain there, and that's the chain that's used for the lifting tag axle feature, and that lets you get to those bottom nuts to get them off. Once you have that done, you can just lower the tag axle, and then you got enough room to easily get that airbag out. The rear bags for the drive axle really weren't an issue. Got those out pretty easily. Hardest part was just getting the push to connect lines off, just because they'd been on there a while, but nothing too terrible. So I'm going to get this bag out, and then I'll move to the forward drive axle bag. All right, moving to these forward drive axle bags. First thing that's a little bit more challenging on these is getting off your air fittings. So you've got this 90 push to connect into this 45 that's up there in the bag. So you do have to remove the push to connect first. Just a little bit difficult on access, but not too much of a problem. So I got this. I'm going to have to jack up the bus a little bit more so that you can see that the height on the airbag is a little bit on the lower side. So want to get that all the way down as much as I can to have more space to get that out without potentially disrupting the ride height valve. Okay, time to keep moving. Well, it's always the last one that gives you the most trouble. I finally got this one out. The nut on the top over here was very stuck, and so what I ended up having to do to get it loose, because I couldn't get enough leverage in there with my hands and I couldn't get a breaker bar outside, I just put a ratchet up there and then used a pry bar to get some leverage on it. Finally got it loose enough to be able to finish it off with an air ratchet, and got it out. You can see what I did here, and I should have done on the other side, I didn't think about it until later, is I just disconnected the leveling valve to get it out of the way so I could get the air spring out without risking damaging those components. Now it's time to go get some fittings, and then I'll put the whole back end back together, and then I will move on to the front. It's a new day, and I'm getting ready to install the airbags here in the back of the bus, both driver and passenger side. Note that the drive axle has 4 airbags. They're all the same. The tag axle has a single airbag, different from the drive axle, and then the steer axle has its own type of airbag, so you can't mix and match. But there's something else that's different that I wanted to show you. If you look carefully on these fittings, you'll see that this one here in my left hand is for a larger diameter hose than this on the right hand. So you might think that this larger fitting might be going on a different bag, like on the tag axle bag, but you'd be wrong. The rear drive axle bags and the tag axle bags all use this same style fitting. However, then the forward bags on the drive axle use this larger fitting. Well, why would that be? Well, the reason is this fitting is a 90, and then this 90 screws into a 45 that goes on the front bags for the drive axle. And if you think about why Prevost would have done this, well, there's an access issue that they couldn't put a straight fitting in and then still have the hose make the appropriate bend. And so then therefore, because you've got these sharp fittings here, you have pressure losses that are associated with it. And in order to keep the same flow rate on all of the bags, you're going to need to move up a size on the fitting, on the hose. Otherwise, you might run into a situation where either airing up or airing down, the drive axle bags could get out of sync, which you don't want. So it was a head scratcher for a minute, but it makes sense once you think about it. I did confirm that the hose is in fact different on there. It wasn't just a mistake at the part shop. So we're going to go ahead. You have to put the airbags in first, and then you put the fittings on, just like with removal. I got my handy bag full of different caps and plugs for different size hose fittings. So I'm going to put something in this little top fitting on the airbag when I put it in. You don't want it to be larger because the hole on the bus is sized to fit the air fitting very tightly, but then this just helps to make sure that you don't get any dirt inside of it or anything like that. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to put on these rear drive axle bags and the tag bags first, and then I'm going to get to the front drive axle bags. One other thing I'll note that I did, there was a little bit of just surface rust on the bases for the airbags, so I went through, I just wiped all the dirt off, made sure it was cleaned up, and then I just did a little layer of spray paint over it to try to help prevent any of that surface corrosion from spreading. So with that, let's get to work. Hardest part about getting to work is actually doing it. I got the tag bags started on both sides, and so let me just show and tell you a couple of things. Obviously, I'm going to have to jack up the tag axle to get the top in. That's not to be unexpected. But I did discover one thing. I had been getting at the nuts through these holes in the frame right here. However, next to this radius arm here, there's an opening where I can fit my hand up, and that was a much easier way to get the nuts started. Now, on both this side and the other side, the nut towards the outside of the coach was easier to get started. There's not very many threads on the bottom of these airbags, so on this side I was able to get them both started, tighten down this one, then go back and tighten down the other one. On the passenger side, I was only able to start some threads on the outer one, and then as I got that tightened down, some more threads became available on the inner one. And so I just did an initial tightening with my little 1/4-inch drive air ratchet with a socket there. I'm going to go back and tighten them properly. Then I will jack up the tag axle and we'll get the little top nuts in. But there's one other thing I want to show you, and I discovered that I'm going to have to go to the hardware store. So if you take a look here, this bolt, or this nut I mean, trying to get it to focus, but this is a finer thread, I think probably 1/2 inch by 20 pitch. If you look at this one, this is a coarse thread. So I had to take a look at the old airbags. On the old airbags that came off of the bus, the bottom nuts were the coarse threads and the top nuts were the fine threads. On these, actually, all of them use coarse threads. So I'm not going to have enough hardware to reuse. I was originally going to buy new hardware all around, but I was not able to find it at the stores I was at yesterday. So I may have to delay things a little bit there, but nothing that's too big of a deal. I should be able to at least keep things moving along for today. So, all right, let's keep going. I bought all new fittings, and the ones with the push-to-connects on them all came with some sealant on them, so I can just put those in, tighten them down, and then get the hose on. Okay, I'm moving along and making progress. On the driver's side, I've got the tag axle bag and the rear drive axle bag in. I don't have quite enough room that I've been able to get that bag in, but I'll just kind of show you the trick I've been doing for these drive axle bags to help get them in. Is I've got a plug that is the same thread as the inner portion of the air fitting plug on the bags, and then what I've done is I've just kind of sat on them or rested my feet on them to try to compress them, then put the plug in. Now over here on the passenger side, I've got all 3 bags in, got those in, and then I've got this forward bag in here. And you might be able to hear the air flowing. That's because I'm airing up the bus from my tank. Now, it's worth noting that I don't just have the key in the on position and the air switch in the normal position. I've got the air switch in the manual position, and specifically I have it set to the rear. So what I've been able to do is put a little bit of air in to help start inflating these bags, make sure that there's no leaks or anything, and now I can try to get more air in them, maybe get just a little bit of extra height, and then I should be able to get that last airbag in and together. Basically that 6th airbag, the forward one on the driver's side, is the only thing I've got left for these. Then I can move to the front axle. All right, now we got the driver's side in. Let's see if this works when I try to air it up. All right, initial looks good. Now I'll let the system air up, try to get a little bit more air in these things. Overall looking good. If you look carefully, you can see that this tag axle bag has a little bit of a fold in it. Nothing to be concerned about, don't put your fingers there. With a little bit more air, then it should pop out just fine. So I'd say that this is looking pretty good, and we can move on to the front. Okay, we're moving on to the front airbags, and you can see I've got the wheel and tire off. I'm doing a couple of other things while I'm up here. I was going through and I was lubing up all of the Zerk fittings. I'm also changing the oil in the hubs, which I think was probably original. That's why I've got this Allen socket and extension in there to remind me to fill the hub, because I have not refilled it. Anyway, getting back to the airbags, these on the independent front suspension are definitely substantially harder to get at, but it does look to be doable. When I looked online to see what some others had said about whether I had to remove the control arm or not, they said no, you don't. It's not fun to do, but you can fit it through. And I had to do a couple of things. So first off, the way that you see everything sitting right now is not the way that it was when I took the wheel off. What I did was I used the manual air inflation setting to inflate the front bags. That pushed the suspension down to get it into basically the full down position. And by doing that, that ends up opening up this area significantly. And so I think the way that this will work is that I'll get the bag out, and it will, not willingly, but still will get out through this area, and then the same thing on the other side. Of note, another thing where this is harder, so your nut and your fitting that attach to the airbag up top are hard to get at. And you can see I've got the air hose off, and I've got a cap on it just to try to keep any debris from getting in. But then you've got this extension pipe that is going to have to come off before you can take the bag out. I believe that the 90-degree fitting on the top of the bag can stay on, at least I hope it can, and that the hole up top is big enough for it. Looks like it should be. And then the one up here, I'm going to have to get a wrench on in there. I won't be able to get a socket, as you might guess. Bottom two are going to be easy. So I'm going to try to get the top ones off first, and then I will get the bottom two off, and then I should be able to get the whole thing out. Wish me luck. Okay, I'm into taking things apart here. I just wanted to show you the angle that I needed to get a 3/4 inch wrench on the nut up here to get it off. There is enough room to get one flat turned before you have to move the wrench. So that part's nice. I also got the air extension off on this side. That was a little bit harder, but there is enough room to turn it with the 90-degree fitting that goes onto the air hose on top. It's very tight, but there is enough for it. So just showing you the fittings here, you've got the extension pipe on there, the male side threads into the 90 that's on the airbag, and then you've got the push to connect 90. So if you replace these fittings, which I'm going to do, I'll reuse this one, but I'll replace these. Make sure that this dimension is certainly no longer. I don't think you'd be able to make that fit. The ones at the shop that they gave me for the rear had a swivel on this portion, and so I hope that's the case, because that'll make lining things up a lot easier. I wanted to pause here so that you could see the angle you need to have this front air spring at to get it out. If you try to compress it and get it through, I don't know, you might be able to, but that was not working for me. Once I put it on its side and there is enough room to do that, then I was able to get it out with a minimum amount of manhandling. So let me take this out, and then I want to compare this one to the new spring and show you a couple differences here. And as you can see, I got it out. That was not particularly fun, but now that I know the trick, the other side should be a whole lot easier. So now, if you look on the right, you can see the old spring, which has a manufacturing date of 2001. So it is almost certainly the original. And then on the left, you have the new air spring. So if you look at these, they look significantly different. They are actually different part numbers. So if you take a look, this one is a 63-0151 part from Prevost, and this one is not that, but I can't read it. And then if you take a look at the part numbers that Goodyear puts on them, these are both Goodyear, they both start with a 566243, but then this is a 120 and this is a 097. I did a little bit of investigation on the forums to see if I could make sure that this was in fact the correct airbag that I was getting sent, since it was obviously different. And it is correct. So what happened was Prevost actually superseded these original airbags with this newer, larger style. When it is inflated, it's supposed to be a 1-inch larger diameter, and I think that checks out. If you put them on the side, you can see that the base on the new one on the left looks to be a little bit larger. It doesn't look like a larger diameter when you see it just sitting there, but keep in mind that this is not in its inflated state. You've got this old one that's been inflated for the most part for the past 20 plus years, and so it's kind of got that state sitting there. These are not. The reason for the change in part number and change in design was that people were complaining that the original springs were not doing a great job of holding up the front end. And I kind of had noticed that it seemed like it was really, the front end was slow to air up, and when I was in manual mode to try to get that front end lifted some more, it took a long time to get it up to that full ride height. So by increasing the diameter of the spring by 1 inch, you increase the surface area, and thus the effect that basically the force that the spring will exert on the bus and then on the perch below it for the same air pressure inside the spring PSI wise. So just throwing a number out there, if you say it's a 10% difference, if this one needed 90 PSI, this one would be 81 PSI. And so the lower the PSI you have in the bag, the quicker it will be to inflate and the easier of a time it will have supporting the bus. I just threw those numbers out there. I have no idea what the actual pressure is in these springs, and I didn't do the math to figure out exactly what the area difference is, but you get the idea. So if you are replacing the front springs on your Prevost with an IFS, you do want this superseded spring. It is supposed to be an improvement, and it is going to be a larger diameter. It is supposed to fit right in there, and I guess we're going to find out here in a minute whether it does. I still need to take that fitting off and then put it onto the new spring, and I'll just point out here, as you can see, the perch, the opening on the right is sized so that the air fitting can fit through it. That was not a problem at all. As you can see here, I've got the 90-degree fittings threaded into the airbags, and I went through on both sides. I cleaned up and spray painted the perches on the bottom just because there was a little surface rust like I did in the back. Now I'm going to try to get these things back in. On the passenger side, I'll note I had it a little bit different. I had to get the top out first and then the bottom out. So that seemed to be easier. I'm going to try doing that same pattern in reverse over here. So the order you have to do with this is get the top nut on. I'm going to then go over to the other side so that I can get that air spring in, get the top nut on there, and then I can jack up the suspension. I'll have enough travel at that point to get the nuts on the bottom portion. And from there, it's just tightening everything up, and then I'll have to put in the extension up on top. I got everything back together here and the front airbags on the driver and passenger side. I ran into a little bit of a snag over at the hose shop with getting new fittings. I really wanted to get the ones with the swivel here like what I had in the back on the forward airbags for the drive axle, but they were out of all appropriate fittings of any size for this with or without the swivel. So I ended up taking these fittings off of the rear airbags and put them here because on the back, a standard fixed 90 was able to work, so I ended up reusing a couple of my old fittings there. They're not too bad to get at if I ever need to change them out if they prove to be leaky. So now what I'm going to do is go ahead and add some air here, just do an initial leak check, make sure everything looks good. I'm not going to inflate them all the way, but make sure that there's nothing obvious, and then we'll put the front wheels on. If you left your drain valves open so that you could more easily get your hoses on and off, make sure to close them. I already did. This side looks good. Driver and passenger side both look good. No audible air leaks, no issues here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and drain the air back out of them, and then I will be able to jack up the hubs to the correct height, put the wheels on both sides, get them on, torque down, and then we'll call this one a job. Well, I got the airbag installation all completed, and the bus is now outside. I had put the air suspension up to maximum height to, among other things, make it easier to get in and out of the shop. It's been sitting for not quite 24 hours, I guess probably about 20, and as you can see, it has not sagged on any of the four sides, so, or any of the four corners. So I'm going to call that a success. I hope you found this video on replacing the air springs on my Prevost interesting and useful. Overall, the job really wasn't too bad to do. The rear was especially not bad at all. The front had a little bit of extra complexity with the independent front suspension, but still, overall, really not too difficult to do. If you're doing this by yourself, you probably could get it done in a weekend. I think having a plan to do it over the course of 2 weekends is probably better. That way you have time to get any additional parts that you need in between. But ultimately, the job really isn't too bad. You don't have to do all 8 airbags at once like I did. I just felt that that was going to be the better way to go. And seeing as my bags were mostly, if not as almost all original, it made more sense to just get it all done now, since I plan to keep this for a long time and not have to worry about it again. I definitely think that having those flexible swivel 90-degree fittings up here in the front and then also on the forward airbags in the back are useful to have. If your local hose shop doesn't have them, you can get them at McMaster as well. As always, leave any questions down below, and thanks for watching.